evening, everyone, and welcome to Flight Club. I'm Hazell, and tonight with me we have Klaus, Leopold, and Troy Magennis. Klaus, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. So, welcome to our first show on YouTube. And guess what? Until now, my internet was not working. So, let's hope for the best that the show will somehow, or the internet will somehow survive an hour of this show. So, today the topic is dependencies, and there is our special guest, Troy Magennis. You know a lot about dependencies. Say hi.
Hi, how are you, everyone?
Yeah.
I'm enjoying Seattle. I'm a bit tired because I was out rioting all last night, so I'm trying to get back to business today.
Cool. So, I wanted to say how's it to everybody and welcome you. We are trying out some new things today, so if you'll give us a little bit of, we're experimenting with some things, and as long as Klaus's internet holds, everything should be great and groovy. We're paying attention to the chat, so please ask questions and fire away in the chat. We will see what's there. We will make some time specifically to take care of the questions, but in the meantime, please ask as we go. We will try to answer them as much as we can during the discussion that follows. So cool. I hope you're ready. Let's get started. I have a couple of questions. So Klaus and Troy, the two of you have been collaborating for many years. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing recently and what's been going on in the world?
Troy.
Well, on my side, I think everyone's getting used to having to work from home, and that's sort of putting some pressure on teams because we depend on each other to actually progress work. And whereas we would just turn around and ask a question, now we've got to actually send an email or create a Zoom call and do stuff like that. So I'm finding that trying to help teams uncover the new way of working and the dependencies on each other and communication-wise has been a topic front of mind. And especially on the forecasting side, everyone's replanning. Business is good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is. Well, yes, Troy and I, actually, for how long do we know each other? It's already a couple of years, I guess, 10 years or something like this. And quite recently we were collaborating around flight levels. We were doing some workshops together and stuff like this. So yeah, Troy has been a part of my life for a very long time.
In a perfect world, Klaus, in a perfect world, we'd be lovers.
So yeah, when we were talking about planning this, you guys mentioned that you have a couple of things planned and some stuff that's coming up. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, what are these new ideas that you've been working on to take over the world, so to speak?
Well, that's obviously you, Klaus.
Yeah, I'm having some issues here with the techniques. I guess, Troy, you need to speak more. I'm sorry.
I guess like everyone, we realize that a lot of the training, especially on flight levels, needs to go online. And a lot of people have specific questions. So rather than try and do, a 16-hour online training course in one Zoom call, we're all sort of splitting our syllabus up into smaller chunks that we can deliver in a shorter, sharper sort of way. Dependencies, forecasting, metrics, introduction to flight levels and that sort of stuff. So I think everyone's trying to find a way to take their in-person workshops online, and we're no exception. So I know I've been offering 2-hour sort of power kickoffs on a particular topic, and that's sort of starting to take traction. But I do miss the workshop exercises where you had the breaks and people could talk to each other, and also trying to work out how to replicate the emotional side of training, which we're losing when we go to Zoom and Skype.
Yeah.
You back, Klaus?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm not sure. But yeah, yes, that's definitely a point. So, especially when it comes to online workshops, it's really hard to read what's going on in the group. And that's what I'm really missing. So when we collaborated in in, I guess it was Düsseldorf the last time. So we were really like adjusting while we were doing the workshop, because there were some certain needs from the group and stuff like this. And well, you can do it in an online world, but it's way harder, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, when people are quiet in the room, you notice. When they're quiet on Zoom, you just think they're listening. And I find it hard to differentiate the two. Not listening to completely lost, and it's hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Cliff.
So, we are here to talk about dependencies. We have a couple of interesting things that we could say about this because, all of us have spent a little bit of time existing in a world that obviously has some dependencies. But before we get started too much into the detail, let's maybe spend a few minutes to define what do we mean by dependencies. What are we talking about here, Troy?
So, yes, dependencies are when you can't progress a piece of work because of something else. And it could be you don't have a person to do it, you don't know who's going to do it, they don't know how to do it, or you need them to do some work before you can start. So anything that's going to block you from progressing work and block flow is a dependency. And I know we tend to, as an industry, sort of narrow in on just that it's about which team's going to do the work and have a dependency on a team, but it's a far bigger problem than that. So to me, a dependency is anything that impedes flow because you have to wait for something else to happen.
Cool. And I think you were also talking about some different types of dependencies as well. Differences between the varying styles and what affects them.
Yeah. So I think that
Do we have the slides there?
You have the slides there, Klaus? Or?
Yeah, they are up and running.
Okay, sweet.
Okay. All right.
But the problem is you can see them, right? But you can see it on your computer, and you just tell me the page number.
Okay.
We'll figure this out.
Yep.
I'm page number 2.
Let's go through to the list of the 4 squares, where all the squares are. If you can go through to the rectangle.
Okay, but there are so many interesting texts. So here are the 4 squares now.
Yeah. Listen, I'm just going to say there is you'll get the links, but there is some great sort of work. We'll make sure you get the slides. Some academic work that looked at all the different types of dependencies you like to have in the computer and software development, agile development workspace. And you'll sort of see that there's quite a few different types. And we just sort of narrow in on which team's going to do it, which is a task dependency. But there's a whole heap about we don't know what to do yet, we've got to learn. That's a dependency. So we don't know something. Then we get into the ones which you know well, which is things have to be done in a certain order, or it doesn't make sense, or it's impossible to do, the task dependencies. And then there's we've got to wait for a specialist. We need a person or a team with a set of specific skills to actually to do that work. So those 3 are pretty well known and written about and documented, and we sort of struggle with them. And I think on the flight level side, when I introduce dependencies now, I sort of talk about those as being the flight levels 1 and 2. They're the team level dependencies, and there's the team, stepping through multiple team sort of sets of dependencies. And that's really where and why we want to visualize them on the flight level boards, is so that we can actually start seeing those dependencies in real life rather than just in people's heads and knowledge. But there's another one which I see that we don't talk about enough or at all in a lot of frameworks that are out there, and that's that it can sometimes mean when we choose to do a feature that it doesn't make sense to do it unless we also do it in the mobile app. So we've got to do Android, we've got to do the iPhone, and we have to do the website at the same time. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And that's what we sort of call product dependencies. And I'm finding a lot of stress in organizations with prioritization is about where there isn't a cohesive strategy about this is the most important feature we want to do across all products, not just one product. So we're pretty good at solving dependencies inside a product, but we're very poor at solving dependencies across an organization. And that's where I sort of find my go-to tool is to sort of introduce a flight level 3 board, so that again, we can sort of show that it doesn't make sense to do this strategy unless all the products roll it out at a similar time, and then we need to schedule the starting order on based on those products. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that dependencies is a big topic, it's a complex topic, and tune out now if you want a really easy answer this isn't the topic you want. If anyone says just sort of start putting red string between sort of cards, they're not the consultant you should be using, because it's far more complex than that.
And we got a question here, and I just found out that nobody can read it, but I will fix it on the way. That's how agile we are here. So, ta-da! I don't know how to pronounce the name. Shyam Kumar asked, why resource dependencies and why not skill dependencies, Troy?
That's a great point. So, in Agile, a lot we sort of say you can solve all dependencies by having cross-skilled, cross-functional teams. So if every team had every skill, we wouldn't have dependencies on other teams, and so forth. And to a degree, that's a partial win, right? If we did do that, but I find that the skills and the people that are needed to do those skills does change over time. So by choosing a new feature, you're emphasizing a new set of skills. So it's really just the time frame in which you need to prepare for that. Because in getting ready to roll out on a new JavaScript framework, or to roll out a feature that moves your product offering into Android from iPhone, you probably need a good 6 months to prepare the ground for that to occur. So there is some skill and resource dependencies which need to be planned further out as part of the strategy, and there are some skill dependencies inside a team which we can handle short term. But you're right, it does make sense to survey the skills that you have on your teams and make sure that you have enough of them so that the work that's coming up has people to do that work. But I think there's two levels of granularity. There is the local skills that you are stretching people to learn to do your local team's backlog, and then there's a set of skills and resources which make sense you don't always need, so it doesn't make sense to have a team always have that skill, and you need to really work out which ones are what. Tough area. Okay. Great question.
Yeah. I have another question. So you're talking about knowledge dependencies and resource dependencies, right? So what is the real difference between, so how would you explain the real difference between knowledge dependencies and resource dependencies? So most of the time a person has a special knowledge, kind of. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. Sometimes the knowledge is something that's unknowable yet, so we need to actually explore the space until we actually understand what the next step is. So we're blocked because we simply don't have the information or research to know what the right next step is. So that's what I think is a knowledge sort of dependency. It's something that we don't know about the market or the product that we need to learn to decide what the next step is. I think you call it, don't you, Okra? You have the OKRs and then the actions. Sometimes a knowledge dependency for me is you don't know which action is right yet. So you're going to run a probe or an experiment to try and work out which one it is. So to me, it's still a dependency. We can't schedule what the right next thing is to do yet because there's something we don't know. So we have to learn it before we do it. So it may not be a person and their skill, it might be an understanding and interpretation of the market dynamics. It might be looking at a competitive analysis and understanding what you should do next. So knowledge dependencies can be far more than just knowing how to do something. It can be learning what to do.
That sounds cool. And there is another question that just came in from, I guess it clapped online, is Jan-Erik Kark. He's actually from Salzburg in Austria. Hi. Well, he's asking about, so what about dependencies on management decisions or non-decisions? Cool question, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of question, especially when there's high uncertainty. Sometimes people get frozen in place. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. Like, especially when we get hit with a pandemic. right? All of a sudden we had all these decisions about the portfolio we planned to do, and now all of the decisions are thrown up in the air. And it's unfair to think anyone could very quickly sort of rationalize and replan a strategy for an organization given that amount of uncertainty, so we freeze. So yes, we know that they're out there and they occur. What a great time to make sure that you use the intellectual capacity of your entire organization, just not your management. So when management failed and blocked you in a dependency, you're now paying the price for not empowering your staff to actually make their own good decisions, because maybe some decision is better than no decision at the moment, and because they're blocked on you, what's going to happen? I guess, if your submarine's flooding, you want everyone to know what to do, not just the captain. And at the moment, I think we're all in flooding submarines, and organizations which empowered people to make better decisions, absent of management having to understand what's going on, are doing well, and those which haven't invested in that are actually struggling. So I think best you can do at the moment is to highlight that, start sending your emails, I'm going to do this unless told otherwise. Start sort of leading by example there and showing your management that you do actually understand it a bit better than they do, because you're closer to the customer, and teach. So being blocked on management is an issue that you have to raise. They don't want that. It's just a byproduct of not sharing or deploying strategy enough that people can make local decisions. Hopefully that answers your question. Great question.
Yeah, cool. Great questions. Thanks so much. I want to change the topic a little bit. Well, change direction slightly. We've talked a lot about defining dependencies and some, specific different types. I want to move a little bit into some of the impacts and what is the difference between the different types of impacts. So, what sort of things are you seeing? What do you experience? What are some common impacts as a result of the dependencies?
Oh, I think it's complete dissatisfaction, right? So, can we eliminate dependencies? No, I don't think we should even try. Like, it would be like a hospital sort of saying, let's cross-train everyone to do every sort of skill set, or have a specialty with every bed in the emergency room. Economically, that does not make sense. So what we're trying to do with managing dependencies is make sure they're evident, and then knowingly make sure we understand which ones are cost-effective to solve and which ones aren't. So you do have to get better at, as an industry, we have to get better at quantifying the impact of lack of flow for all reasons, and dependency is just one of them, right? So I think what I sort of try and help companies do is sort of saying, well, that's like having 6 people sitting idle at the moment. Is that what you wanted? No, it's not. But that's a big thing that a company should solve with dependencies. Instead, they're arguing about whether they should do story point estimation. Drives me insane, right? So there are things which are the dependencies add in risk, which cause a massive impact. I think, Klaus, you want to go on a couple of slides there to the one where there's the impact of dependencies? Because this is just one.
Do you have a page number for me?
You're looking at.
Do you have a page number for me?
No, go. It's not the next one. It's not the next one.
It's the flight delays.
Yeah, don't see it yet. There we go. Flight level delays example. So this is the flight level. So I thought, given that this is Flight Club, we need to talk about have some sort of flight analogy in there. So I looked at the data behind delays of air travel, should we ever be allowed to do it again. And the thing is that this is the time of day on the x-axis there. So left is earlier in the day, right is later in the day. And the blue line is the amount of time on average that flights are delayed. And you can see as later in the day, the delays get larger. And we're sort of like, interesting. Okay, so the later I fly, why does the later in the day I fly impact the likelihood of delay? And if you go to the next slide, we can sort of see that the factor that actually correlates with that same shape of average flight delay is late aircraft. So as planes don't just do one flight a day, they do a sequence of flights, a set of dependencies between cities. The later in the day, the more chance there is to actually have a delay before that flight. So, on the first flight of the day, the flight is either late or on time. Second flight of the day, it can be on time, or it can be delayed by the first flight, and it can be delayed by itself. And the third flight, it can be delayed by the first flight, the second flight, or the third flight. So the only chance that no delays occur at all is one chance. Everything else is every permutation. And it just got yelled at by Klaus. Troy Magennis, please try and center. I got a center on the screen. There we go. So if you go to the next slide, Klaus, we can sort of see that the map of how this works out is that every time we add a dependency, it's like adding an extra flight stop on that air travel, and the odds start growing. The permutations of delays outnumber the chance of being on time by one chance into the power of those number of flights that you have, which is huge, right? So it means by 4 flights, you have one chance in 16 of being on time. One chance in 16. So there's 15 times greater chance that you're going to be delayed by at least either one flight being late or one team delivering to you late. And this is enormous, right? So trying to forecast through systems where there's any number of dependencies, 2, 3, or 4, is your biggest impact to actually being able to reliably understand when something is going to ship is dependencies. So you can try and minimize them, but the chances are still far greater that at least one team or one task or one dependency is going to delay you more than everything flowing through exactly as how you anticipated. Now, when we do planning, we plan for everything flowing through as anticipated, and that's the problem. Is that we need to start incorporating into our plans, knowing that some of these dependencies are going to be violated and broken and delayed, and that's what I want to try and help people do. That's enough of the slides, I think. Does that
Sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Huge impact. Your biggest impact. Stop complaining about story points.
There was one question from Pavel. He was asking if you could somehow give the slides away. Can you provide the slides?
Yep.
Perfect. So we will somehow put it in the comment section or so, and then and there's another question from Ellen. Ellen asks, is there any good way to transform dependence delay into money measurement? Money, always good.
Yeah. I mean, it's if we were able to come up with a good cost of delay figure, we can absolutely sort of say for every day that a dependency is waiting, what is the cost lost in the market share? So I think our ability to actually come up with even a crude cost of delay, even if it didn't include all the market opportunity, but it included just the cost of carrying the team or the idleness of a team, lack of flow, for want of a better word, we would actually be able to put an economic number on it. And that's exactly the thing that we have to get better at, is expressing delays and flow in dollars is the only way that you're going to get the right attention paid to fixing it. So yeah, it's a great point. It's what I find when people go into cost of delay is they try and get a perfect number. I want you to stop doing that. I think even just rounding it to the nearest 1,000 or tens of thousands is probably good enough to show which is your top 3 and which are your bottom 3, which are insignificant, right? So your job is to try and quantify it just enough to sort of show urgency, not to quantify it down to the number of cents.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard a lot about is, this kind of idea that everybody's trying to reduce their dependencies and not have so many. They realize that there's impacts and they understand that there's different types and so on. But one of the challenges is obviously that we have lots of dependencies, and part of that is that we end up taking quite a long time to resolve them. So like Klaus talks about this idea of, you have someone needing a team to do something over here, and then there's 5 or 6 more teams that have to do something. Each of the teams is super, super fast, but then when we request something from another team, we have to wait 8 weeks before it gets to the front of their backlog, right? So it's not so much that you have dependencies, it's kind of about how long you take to resolve them or how good you are at managing them. What's your take on some ways that we can manage dependencies better?
I think the first one, the bit which drives me insane and the really low-hanging fruit that you can do as a team is to actually inform a downstream team the moment that you start something, not when you finish it. So at the moment, I see a lot of the tools sort of do the handoff at the end. You mark it complete and then it goes into someone else's backlog as ready to start. Well, I want to see it put on the backlog when you start it. So if team 1 is going to head off to team 2, the moment team 1 starts, it should be in team 2's backlog. So they can keep skipping over it, but it should be at the top of the backlog so that when it is finished, it is high enough on the list to be pulled directly in, and they're able to anticipate when its arrival is. So I like to help teams get to a point where they give an estimated time of completion. So when they start it, take your cycle times of how long it takes you to do similar work, pick the 85th percentile of it, and tell the team downstream, expect it in 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
So whereas the typical process I see that tools sort of encourage is that team 1 has it and it's theirs, and then when they finish it, it gets handed to team 2, but team 2 now has to sort of put it in the mix with everything else that they've got hit with. So the 2 main things I like to see is telling downstream teams to anticipate it and having a corporate and clear view of priority. Because the second thing is if team 1 and team 2 don't agree on how important the work is, team 2 may not start it when you thought they should, and you get frustrated. Why are you doing that? Well, it just means there's no shared context in importance, no shared context in cost of delay. So if you can put a cost of delay on values even roughly, both teams can have a bit of a shared understanding of what's the impact of waiting on this item versus everything else. So shared context of prioritization and cost of delay and impact, and telling downstream teams that it's on its way. They're my 2 go-tos.
So one of the things that we used to do, I think we used to do quite well at Spotify, was we had this notion of which was number 1 and which was number 3. And the idea was basically that number 3 should never be blocking number 1. And sort of the way that this plays out in practice is kind of this idea that, if I need your help and you're working on the most important thing, I probably shouldn't be interrupting you. But if you need my help, however, I can probably stop doing what I'm doing. But the thing that I find most fascinating is a lot of companies are doing prioritization in the sense of, here's the 17 things that are all number 1. And this is not really communicating such clear context. And so I really think that this point of being able to say, what is the most important thing, and being able to, what I recommend is usually doing it as a sequence list. We actually have to rank them. It's one time that stack ranking is actually a good idea. So let's do something like that, and immediately it starts to clear up. Obviously you have to have access to that information, but giving that out to people and helping them to understand, okay, this thing is actually lower down on the list makes things a lot easier.
I think you're having the arguments earlier, which is the right thing, right? So by forcing the stack ranking, you're not having the argument when it's blocked and waiting. You're having the argument before it's blocked and waiting. So anything you can do visualization-wise to cause an argument to happen earlier before something is blocked is a valuable tool. So stack rank away on items. Go for it.
I have another question here from Dennis Molan, if I pronounce this correctly. So he's asking, okay, who manages actually dependencies in agile environments where several teams are involved? I mean, Cliff, I would like to ask you. I mean, you were working with Spotify. Spotify is not famous for their top-down whatever culture. So one could say this is an agile organization. So what did you do?
I think having that clarity around what actually is important and what's not. But I find fascinating how often companies have something and really no slight mint towards project managers or other types of management. But you have a dedicated manager who runs around and shouts at people to do the thing that's not important to them. And that to me seems like the weirdest way to be able to handle this kind of dependency management. It's often what we end up with is we've got somebody whose job it is to go and harass everybody else to do something that's actually number 17 on the list, not even number 3. And, you hire tons and tons of people to do that, when in reality, if you just prioritized effectively, you may not have so much of a challenge. What I find, to answer the question, is most helpful is to have the people who are actually responsible for the work talking to each other and collaborating and deciding when to make that decision and when do we do this work. So if I need your help with something, we should probably have a bit of a discussion and say, no, I'm going to need you on Tuesday. And you're like, well, actually, I'm busy doing this webinar on Wednesday, and so I'm preparing. So Tuesday's not a good day for me. And then I could play the card that says, well, actually, my thing's more important than yours, so where. Or I can say, actually, that does make some sense. Let me, wait, we can chat on Thursday. But talking straight, human to human, the more times you add intermediaries and the more times you have to hand off between somebody else, just the slower the whole process takes. I mean, you got to escalate to your manager, who escalates to another manager and has to send it to another manager. And then eventually the team finds out, it's going to take a week before they even know that this dependency exists. And unfortunately, that is the reality for a lot of people in their organizations. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question. But for me, that's the approach that I like to take. Perhaps I'm a little bit more idealistic because I've seen this work in practice. I think for a lot of folks, they've never seen something like this. And so it's a little bit like, I can't imagine actually working like that, where, we have good, healthy conversations between the humans actually doing the work. But yeah.
Well, I want to kick in another topic, which is reorganization. So what I hear quite often, especially from the agile world, more or less, is like, okay, you can easily eliminate your dependencies if you're just building the right company structure, like put all your knowledge in one team and this team is delivering to the market and stuff like this. So what are the two of you thinking about this? I mean, if the two of you is not good, so I say, Troy, what are you? What do you think about this? And then you, Cliff.
Yeah,
Troy.
I think again, investment in time spent. How cross-skilled do you want your teams? Do you want them to also be able to clean their own monitors and stuff like that, refill the vending machines and stuff like that? I mean, we already have some specialization in our organization structures. I think even if we did that, it might work within a product, but it certainly wouldn't work across product. So, as you got to sort of, a lot of these prioritization decisions about where money is spent inside a company mean that we do divide our workforce up across multiple product lines. There could be the print version of the media as well as the online version of the media. So how far do we take this? That doesn't make sort of sense to actually sort of invest in too much optimization and making sure every team can do every skill for every product in an organization. That's uneconomical and unfeasible. So I think that that's a pretty heavy sledgehammer solution to a problem which we could solve just by talking more. And I think that's the issue. The real cause of it is the fact that no matter what we do, the dependency about decide. You better.
Please don't die live.
Dependencies on air. Give me a second.
Okay, sure. Maybe I jump in and I share what I was thinking around this. So I think there's a couple of things. So, I mean, Troy was talking about this thing of cross-skilled teams and so on. And I think one of the realities is that we end up with is the idea of cross-functional teams, I think, is good to a point. But the reality is that you can quite quickly end up, if you've got to have every single skill inside your team to build a complex product, you end up with 25,000 people of the entire company all on the same team. Now, obviously, at some point that becomes unfeasible and we need to scale it back a little bit and we need to say, okay, cool. We need some sort of smaller unit that can have a good communication balance within the context of the team and kind of focus on a smaller part of the deliverable. But if you imagine it kind of more as a baton race, if you think around like the relay race in the Olympics, the person who's going next is literally waiting with their hand out ready to run. And that's the kind of thing. And Troy was talking about an example when we were chatting about this the other day, and we're saying, and I've seen this at a couple of companies where they're dealing with this kind of a crisis scenario. And as a result of something happening, you're actually all aligned and ready because the strategy of the company has changed so fundamentally that you're saying, actually, for the first time in our lives, we have this super clear thing that is actually number one. And so what we're able to do is we're actually able to align this relay race. And what happens is that as soon as I arrive to hand off the baton to the next person, they're ready and waiting, and it just charges. And you see large banks that have gone from, taking 36 months to deliver any kind of project down to a couple of weeks, and they're shipping some new thing in response to coronavirus or in response to, situation that occurs at any given time. And basically, that kind of a thing needs to be able to happen. And the point is that you prove that it's possible to do this even within a large, complex organization. And I think the question to ask is, what's the difference? And for me, quite simply, the difference is the focus. You've made it clear what is actually important. And to put it another way, you've reduced the whip. Because normally what's happening is I'm going to 45 meetings about topics that are not super important. I'm having a sideshow meeting about something else. I'm busy with the standard performance appraisal cycle and 25 other things I could carry on listing. But as soon as you make something clear and you say, this is really important, suddenly things start to move a lot faster. So yeah, that's my take.
That's great. I'm back. I've got oxygen now.
Nice.
And the example in the US recently was a bank which was telling me they couldn't do anything in 36 months when the US government offered sort of loans for payroll to keep your employees employed. All of those same banks that said they couldn't do anything in 36 months managed to have a whole loan application process live within 1 week. So, it's not the fact that they don't have smart people who could do this. It's the fact that management gets in the way and causes them not to do that in general, right? And you're right, it's lack of focus. It's very clear that, if we don't get our loan applications online, no one gets this money, and we don't get our 0.25%. So economically, it happened. And same thing when there's outages. I love watching organizations who say they can't do anything fast operate when there's downtime, unplanned downtime. All of a sudden, everyone is one cohesive unit. No one's sort of saying, oh, by the way, you missed a comment, spelling mistake in a comment on line 6. They know what to do. So I think, when people sort of say that if we just hired smarter people, I see those dumb people doing extraordinarily good things in a crisis, and that sort of puts the blame at a different level, doesn't it? Organization and management. And so dependencies isn't an individual team problem, it's an organization problem, and it's mainly making sure that strategy is clear.
Cool. I have another question here, and I think from Martin Ferreira, if I pronounce this correctly. Troy, I guess this question is definitely for you, but please remember we need to stop the stream in 20 minutes. So you could probably talk for days about this. No, but Martin is asking, so do you have a way to introduce the impact of dependencies into the forecast?
Great question. Hang on, I just have another shot of gin.
He says at 9 a.m. in the morning.
That's true.
Breakfast gin is good.
It was a late day. I got up late. So it's difficult. So the only way you can actually incorporate dependencies into forecasting and planning is by stepping out and taking doing a forecast at a whole system level rather than an individual team level. So you might sort of stop doing the forecasts at a cycle time for the work and stories at a team level and start doing a forecast for the cycle time of an epic or a feature. And then what you're trying to do then is bring the organization's memory back to sort of saying, even though this seems simple things in the past have taken 6 months. And because of these reasons, because we don't prioritize it properly, it's not the only thing that we're doing. So one technique is to use something called reference class forecasting, which is just simply that whenever you finish a feature or an epic as a company or an organizational unit, like a product or something like that, write down on a post-it note how long it took and stick it on a wall somewhere and keep those post-it notes ordered from shortest to longest. So when someone says, how long is it going to take to do this item, you can sort of walk along the wall and sort of saying it's similar in complexity to these two, and they took 3 months. So if you're thinking that it's going to take less than 3 months, it's not. Historically, it hasn't. So unless you tell us it's super critical and really important and we should push everything else aside, it's going to take 3 months. So I think you got to try and take your eye off the detail when you're dealing with forecasting through multiple teams of dependencies, and stop people being over optimistic based on just their knowledge of the little bit of the work that they need to do without the handoffs. So yeah, best thing to do is keep a way of reminding the organization just how long it took to do similar things in the past, and only going to that forecast. Hopefully.
Cool. So there was a question relating to what we were talking about earlier. You guys hear me okay? Yeah? Cool. Someone was asking, we were talking about story points earlier. And this is obviously one of the topics that I quite enjoy. I'm jumping around a little bit in questions. Sorry if everybody's asked questions before then. But
what was the name?
One of the things.
Seen this question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry. Cool. Yeah, but basically the question is, so what about story points? A lot of people are saying, well, story points is the solution to, if we just know the size of things or the complexity, then we can figure out how to do them and how long they're going to take. And then whenever something's late, we just basically, we know where the problem lies. It's obviously the team needs to get better at estimation, or their story point estimation is wrong. At least that's been my general experience of how people are using it. Of course, there's a lot more to it. But what's your take on story points and estimation?
At the team level, it makes sense, right? Because they're in control of the delays, and when they pull it into a sprint, they don't expect the delays to happen. They've not chosen to pull something into a sprint that's going to be immediately blocked, hopefully. That's much harder to do when you have 6 teams that have to collaborate, and you cannot know in advance whether those other teams are going to be delayed or what else they're going to be doing. What's going to jump in front of your piece of item that means it's not going to flow through smoothly. So, we know from data that about, it is incredible, absolutely incredible, if 15% of the time is hands-on time. Normally it's much lower than that. Only 5% of the time, if we look at a piece of work, an epic or a feature, only 5% of the time is actually someone touching it and coding it or fixing it or setting up config files. Now, that means sort of, 85% is sort of waiting idle somewhere. So those story points don't really help you sort of estimate that idle time, which is the majority of the time that a piece of work is going to be spent. So the further out you look and the more teams are involved, the less that points will be a good estimator and correlated to time. So the more you're forecasting out across multiple teams, the less story points will work for you. Having said that, they were the first attempt at a system metric, because we could measure the system velocity over time and say you could deliver 15 points. So they got us out of actually having to estimate something and it's going to take 1 day to do and then have it take 15 days to do. They at least gave us some chance to bring back into balance that so many points get done over a period of time. So they are a system measure of sorts. They just they start becoming less useful for forecasting the further away from a team you get, because the impacts and the hands-off time, the delay time start dominating the reason that how long things are going to take rather than the hands-on time. So I'm not knocking them as a tool at a team level for getting on the same page as to how complex something is. I am saying they are not the best tool for the job as you're trying to forecast a portfolio across multiple teams. They become a misleading measure of effort at that point in time, because a really simple item could have a really complex set of dependencies. So even though it's only a 1-point item, it could be a super hard item to coordinate across multiple teams. So now you're being misled that a very small, simple item is the fast thing to do. That's why they're erroneous, right? So by keeping it saying and using throughput and saying it's an item, someone has to dig deeper and sort of saying it's an item and it's a super complex sort of dependency map. to get this one done. So this is a high risk item to schedule. So I think starting to, if I could get you to do one thing, spend less time story pointing and more time categorizing work as to the complexity of dependency chains or a type of work that sort of, we would expect all things of this type of work to take a similar amount of time to do. If you spend more work as a team categorizing work in types and dependency chains and less time estimating story points, I'd be a much happier, and I'd still have hair.
I think it's fascinating because this is a question that comes up for me very often, and I'm sure you get the same, is that, you know, we're trying to make things faster in the working steps. But when I look around and I look at a project or a piece of work that's happening, it's more often than not, it's the waiting between the working that's consuming most of the time. You know, and so the idea that we want to get better or faster at estimating or better at working or speed up that team over there, when in reality, you know, I had this scenario at a company, 36 months lead time, reducing the WIP limit and some focus and producing that sort of, you know, let number 3 not interrupt number 1. All of a sudden, they're down to 6 to 12 weeks on average for the same pieces of work. And, you know, it's not that people are suddenly smarter or that they're doing something, you know, they suddenly turn into geniuses. It's really just that they provided some focus and said, okay, cool, some things are going to move faster, and that means some things are going to move slower. So, yeah.
You don't need a Ferrari to commute to work during standstill traffic.
Exactly. I like this.
Good point. So shall we take one more question from the comments here?
Yes.
There is one from Romeo Matos. Could you give some examples of product or strategy dependencies? Troy.
Yeah, so these are my favorite at the moment. Once you start looking for these, you actually sort of understand it. I mean, the classic dysfunction that I sort of see sometimes here in the US is around the end of the year when bonuses are due. And it's like the Hunger Games of prioritization. If I don't get my work prioritized and my product sort of features sort of done, I don't get my bonus. So what happens is on product sort of strategies sort of stuff is that there's always an order of work, even with cost of delay. If you had perfect cost of delay information, there's an order that we should do work. And then we have to juxtapose. That's where the problem comes in. I'm going to take a picture of the screen in a second just to catch Klaus out. But, so product dependencies are around one of two things. They're either the fact that there's an adversarial relationship between products and there isn't the person who should be making the decision about which one goes first and is more important from an organizational growth perspective, in other words, making more money, market perspective, they're not making that decision. They're leaving it up to their subordinates to make. And those subordinates are acting against each other's interest in local interest. Second one is the fact that sometimes even simple things like it makes sense that we might want to grow and support sort of a new market of phone that's coming out. But by doing that, we just don't have the resources to even maintain business as usual. So sometimes what happens in a product dependency is we know that we need to grow our new products in a certain way, but we can't get the investment required to do that because we haven't paid down technical debt enough that we're sort of hamstrung in maintaining our existing products. So product dependencies are about understanding how the money and the resources in the company are being shared across multiple products and platforms and investment areas to make sure that the company grows most in a medium to long term. So they come down to the company may well have a strategy, but it's not actionable. And how do we make that strategy actionable in a way which is fair and done knowingly? And at the moment, I don't see many companies visualize that. And what we do I think, sort of a lot of the stuff I try and get on the flight level 3 boards is to exactly start spelling out the trade-offs that the company is being forced to make, knowing that they have a strategy they want to do. I try and highlight the fact that they cannot do that with the current org structure or the current investment that they're doing. And sometimes it's as simple as increasing the investment. No one's ever made the case as to why they need more money to grow more teams or to grow more capacity. And when it's pointed out to them and someone has to actually walk past that board every day and see that something hasn't started because you don't have capacity, you get capacity. So I find product dependencies are about, it's just that there isn't, there's a misalignment between strategy and action, and it's unintentional. Sometimes it's intentional based on my bonus. Sometimes it's not. Again, having one thing to do, Cliff, if we can find someone in the organization to make it and communicate clearly as to why something's number 1 versus number 3, that's a great help. It's very, very rare.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
there's one more question. Can I put this in? So I somehow saved it for for the end from Christian Bigla. Hi, Christian. He's actually attending the Flight Levels coaching curriculum these days. And I saved the question for the end because I get it so often. So tools. Are there, so based on your experience, can you recommend a tool to help structure or help the dependency management more or less? The tool question, it has to be here, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to diplomatically answer the question. I think the tool vendors, started off, and a lot of frameworks, to be honest, started off sort of focusing at a team level. So they do an okay job. I'm not going to say they do a great job. They do an okay job at that sort of level. And then there's another set of portfolio management tools which are out there, which try and sort of record the decisions around what we're going to do and what we might do. But no, I don't think any tool vendor has actually managed to make a step forward here. I do see Atlassian doing some more investment in this area. Atlassian bought, I think they have now Jira Align, which is a tool which is really heavy on doing heat maps from dependencies and so forth. Love to see where that goes, but it's one of their higher end products. They're not really making it equally and easily available to small to medium companies of Jira. So I think there's some low hanging fruit. I see some of the vendors do linking between tools to show you that a dependency is likely to be encountered, but I don't see any of the tool vendors anticipating in advance that work like this tends to hit these sort of teams, and you should know that. So, we're back to the same way Kanban started, right? I mean, absent of a tool, we start using whiteboards and post-it notes. and I think the visualization part of flight levels is the right way of doing that. The whole reason of flight level 2 and 3 is really to start visualizing that and having those conversations and arguments earlier before work is blocked, that work will be blocked unless you make a decision, Harry. So I think at the moment, the only tools we're sort of heading on to, and the other online tools are playing catch up, is starting a good visualization of the context.
Yeah. Conversation.
Sorry, can't help you. I've got some spreadsheets, but yeah, I mean, again, everywhere I go, I have to create something special for everywhere I go, and that's absurd. There certainly needs to be a better way of dealing with. They're all recording the work that's being done and not that the work has stopped. So if I could have one feature enhancement to tools, it would be to really highlight blocked work and delays, work that's aging unnecessarily, then just sort of show that work is in progress. Doesn't help.
Yeah. Slept Online just said again, use your common sense, no tools needed.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the sort of the ultimate purpose of what we talk about when we introduce flight levels, is to try to get people to interact. And at the end of the day, most of the time I've seen people using a tool, and quite frankly even a whiteboard, and there's far too many things on that board. Nobody really knows what's happening. You've got Jira being an information refrigerator rather than an information radiator, and just tons and tons of stuff around. But at the end of the day, we're not actually talking to each other about what the important thing is. And so I kind of like the idea of let's start with that as the first thing. Let's get people talking about what's important, and then we go from there. So yeah, cool. So we are almost out of time,
Yes.
and I think given that we made a forecast that we would finish at 10 o'clock my time, we should try to honor that commitment as best we can. So before we wrap up, I just want to thank firstly Troy for joining us. It's been awesome, and also to everybody else who's on the chat and streaming live from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you. We are doing this on a roughly every 2-week cycle, and so there will be more of these in the future. Please, if you like what you're seeing, let us know and hit the subscribe button, and you can get notifications about next time. We are also on Meetup if you want to sort of sign up and get a calendar invite for the future. And of course, reach out to us on Twitter. That's probably the easiest place, Twitter or LinkedIn for any of us. Jump on, have a chat to us, ask us any further questions maybe that you haven't got an answer to, or just want to kind of connect and say, how's it? And tell us about what you're up to. We're friendly people. We like to talk to all of you. So yeah, Troy's not friendly, but the rest of us are friendly. So,
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Any closing words from the two of you?
Some closing words from my side. It was the first time here doing this live, and you didn't see everything. So I tried to make funny faces and to make Troy laugh, but I couldn't succeed. So I really loved the power. Oh, I really love the power of the production manager. I can decide what people see.
Yeah.
No, it was fun with you guys. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining Troy.
No,
Troy.
thank you for inviting me. Well done. Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.
And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, Ian.
Yes,
You
subscribe.
reminded me. Yeah. Show your
And
love, subscribe, and
messages.
hit the bell button. Then you get notifications. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Excellent.
See you next time. Cheers.
Bye.